I am very behind today, so I am just going to hurry the hell up. Also, I got makeup all over my sweatshirt, so I don't put the cap on my makeup, and the top of it hardens and explodes. Anyway, I kind of tend to avoid this topic in general because, I don't know, I don't want it to come across like I'm complaining in some kind of a way or that I'm like very triggered or like agitated by skeptics, but I think it's kind of interesting to do a deep dive into why people are skeptics, why people are supposed to be skeptics, and what you can do to kind of like not change skeptics' minds, or like, I guess skeptics isn't the right word. I mean, it can be, but more so like pessimists, and take more control over your own life, your own confidence, your own spiritual gifts and abilities, and really anything. Like, I know that this video is talking about like spirituality and skeptics, but skeptics are everywhere in our lives, no matter what we're doing, right? Like, if you have a particular job or career, you have people who, you know, don't think or want you to succeed, or in your relationships, or in your personal growth journey and your success. So while this is like coming from more of a spiritual perspective, I think it can be applicable to a lot of different things. So in terms of like skeptics and pessimists, like skeptics are people who are just kind of like skeptical in general. It's not that they are closed-minded or that they have like they're closed off in any sort of way. I think that they are just sort of wanting to know and understand a little bit more, make their own judgments. I feel like honestly in like almost every single given situation, besides things which are like incredibly time sensitive or important or like life or death or like that kind of thing, it's good and it's okay to be a little bit skeptical. Obviously, my cat is screaming at me. Obviously, if you're in a situation where you're kind of like overcomplicating things or you find it really difficult to come up with a decision, I would probably argue that you may have some like intuition alignment issues. Your conscious self and your subconscious self is not really on the same page, but I think through any sort of like transitional period, there can be a lot of confusion and chaos. And on top of that, you're kind of like moving into a different timeline. So you may be sort of pulling what is right from a previous timeline, and also pulling what is right from a future timeline, or even parallel timelines and different timelines. And yeah, I mean, life isn't always very straightforward. It's not always black and white. Like, you know, sometimes there's a little bit more investigation needed in order to make the right decision. Anyway, so I want to kind of go into why I feel people are skeptics or pessimists in general, because I feel like it actually has a very interesting foundation. I genuinely feel that throughout time, there's always been a need for skeptics. If you think about a lot of different times in histories, and this doesn't even like talk about different dimensions, we as people, or we as beings, or whatever entities, have been under a lot of strict guidance and control. It can really be from anything, but I'm more so thinking kind of like government or political control, even like socioeconomic control. You know, I think again, it can kind of be anything. It can even be like more personal, right? Like you could be under, you know, the guise or control of an abusive relationship, whether that's a family member or a loved one, you know, whatever it may be. I think that, you know, manipulation and control is a lot more pervasive than we may kind of see it as being, because I think almost like part of ourselves is given to preconditioned notions or fallacies, and or we just kind of have to live under the guise of something or someone else, whether, you know, that's our parents, whether that's our job, whether that's, you know, like our landlord, whatever. You know, there's sort of always a time and a place where we're like in some way, shape, or form bending to someone's will. And there's definitely been times in the past where this has been like severely taken advantage of. So I feel like through kind of like either ancestry trauma or just like, you know, our energetic DNA, we're really, it's like kind of like a defense mechanism. It's like a survival sort of technique to be really skeptical, even, you know, when it's, even when it comes to like a biological standpoint, right? Like we have certain fears for a reason. Like we have certain discernment, perception values for a reason. So it's really important. And hypothetically, if I'm arguing this from like a spiritual perspective, that like, oh my gosh, I wish that anyone and everything could be like open-minded and believe in spirituality and like metaphysics and life after death and whatever, I'm 100% sure that at different points and places in time, there's been a lot of spiritual abuse, a lot of people being taken advantage of. And I find that the skepticism is like genuinely really healthy, right? Because we don't want to get into, we don't want to go into another phase where we are being controlled and manipulated and taken advantage of. Like, we have to have this singular intuition perception value in order to avoid this, so that we can retain more control over ourselves, us as, you know, a benefit collective, and our thoughts, ideas, emotions, whatever it may be, the physical things that we own. It's amazing and great to have our own intuition and autonomy, and I find it to be like really important. So I think skeptics in general have not only an important place in society, but I think an integral place in society. If we also consider that through intention, we have fractaled and created ourselves as a collective, to like have skeptics exist, to have some of us be skeptics, like it's intentional. There's a reason why that's the case. And I feel like it could be for so many different reasons. It could be kind of like laddering back to my point that like we need people to discern, you know, what is good and bad, what is beneficial, what's detrimental, whatever. But I also think that people who are skeptics or pessimists, they're not supposed to live a spiritual lifestyle or like that type of lifestyle, a metaphysical type of lifestyle. They're supposed to do something incredibly different. And like perhaps being a believer could ultimately be a detriment to what they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve in this lifetime. So I feel like there's genuinely any number of reasons. Maybe they know someone who is spiritual and it's part of that spiritual person's learning, growth, and development for them to be surrounded by skeptics. And it could be the opposite. Maybe you're supposed to join this world as a skeptic or a pessimist and grow into, you know, a believer in some way, shape, or form. But to hate on skeptics in general is really anti-self, because hypothetically, I'm in a situation where I just wish and want everyone to believe me, because not necessarily in a way that it triggers me, it just like makes things like a lot more difficult, and like you just have to kind of deal with like a lot more negative energy. So it can be very like tiring or distracting or whatever. You know, there's other people who are in my exact same position who are saying the exact same thing about their, you know, their beliefs and theology. So it's kind of like, how can I possibly kind of complain? We all have our own agendas. We have things that we want to share with the universe, things we want to express. And, you know, it's just kind of like a value of life. It's interesting. It's like just one big giant game, you know, who has the best method of sharing and expression, like who is going to be most listened to. Like I don't know, like I guess that sounds kind of weird, but like it's fascinating to review this from like a cultural perspective. Like who are people paying attention to and why? You know, is it because they have the loudest voice? Is it because they have the most influential style, the most followers, the most charisma, the most relatability? Like I find it incredibly fascinating to deduce what these things are. I think that a lot of people kind of hate on, you know, influencers and, you know, whatnot. And I find it so interesting because like, if you have a clear channel with being an influencer, you're supposed to do that in this lifetime. And like, obviously nothing comes easy for anyone and everyone, but there's still a level of challenge and difficulty, whether it's in this current moment or it's sustaining it over time or just kind of like dealing with issues surrounding it. So it's always interesting, you know, to look at who people are kind of hating on, to be honest. But I completely also understand a lot of the other cultural issues with like certain people being famous for no reason, and how, you know, that is intertwined with race and gender. And like, I totally get it, that there are a lot of very valid complaints. So, you know, not going into like that area of it, but more so just talking about the fact that, oh, this person is like famous for doing nothing. I'm just like, I guarantee you they were supposed to be famous in this lifetime, and maybe we don't understand it. But like clearly they do, I guess. I don't know. So there have been people who have asked me like how to kind of like deal with skeptics, and this is a really, really interesting question. There are so many different like approaches that you can take, but you know, I generally find that people like kind of have their minds made up, and like, obviously there's a challenge in spirituality that like there's not a lot that can be proven that's tangible or like real, I guess you could say, even though there are a lot of instances where psychic ability has influenced and impacted the collective in a very positive way. I talked about this in a previous video, whether it's, government politics, national security, justice system, and then of course like on an individual personal basis as well. But it's really hard to have any concrete evidence, because I think that people expect that like people are like computers where there's just one right answer and that we kind of like express in binary code. And while there's a lot of things in this universe that are binary code, pretty much like anything in our matrix physical reality, the readers of this information have their own unique perception value. So it would essentially be like someone asking a bunch of different people to view a painting and dissect and understand what the point of it was and what the meaning of it, was. Because it's not just delineating information as you see fit, it's also delineating information for how your client sees fit, which is kind of like a slightly added challenge. Like you're quite literally, a medium, essentially. So because our expression, and not just our expression, but our processing is on an individual perception value basis, it's really, really hard to get precise information 100% of the time. There's also some other like really interesting aspects and parts to this, which I don't really want to go into right now just because I don't have the time, but I do want to kind of like talk about why the challenges and why specific information is sometimes hard to gather and regurgitate, because I feel like it has to do with the energetic resonation, and I don't know, I find it to be very interesting. But anyway, it kind of like ladders back to the fact that like nothing is like really real. So like we're trying to kind of like, in terms of answers, put like a square peg into a circle hole, except the circle hole like doesn't really technically exist. So you can bring up like these points and arguments to try and convince somebody, like whatever physical information that you have. I genuinely just think that people, it just like is what it is. Like, yeah, it's great to have these conversations. And I think really the only thing I want to like pressure people into is just like being more open-minded in general, but also like digging deeper into things. Like, I don't really feel like there's a lot of value in examining things on like a surface level. The reason being is not just because I think it's stupid, but our physical reality is changing. Like it's already changing. It's already changed. Like it's just evolving so quickly and so fast that like simply looking at something at just like a quick glance or like its physical manifestation is sort of irrelevant, I guess you could say. So like when people get very binary, very black and white, and like very like this is what it is, I have to be like, yeah, for like how long? Like, or can it be modified or destroyed? Like, do we even have control over that? So like it's much more worth it, in my opinion, to look into the deeper meaning, the deeper cause, the root issue, the energetic resonance, because that's something we can wrap our minds around rather than just like all the way down the line, this like one particular physical manifestation of it, which again can like change in 5 seconds. So that's why I encourage people to like look into things like a little bit deeper. It's also like really helpful on a healing basis and perspective. But anyway, again, kind of like off on my tangent here. So yeah, you can have conversations with people, you can like pressure them into doing things. The issue is just that everyone has such a unique perception value that like, and there's a reason for it, again, kind of like going back to that. So it's just like not always worth it. And like, I feel like if we're just kind of like coexisting in this world where every single person is trying to argue with each other or convince the other person of their beliefs, particularly if they do it with negativity and like embarrassment and shame, which is like just the worst, like we're just going to be in a circle. Like we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to go anywhere. So what I find to be most important is, being your best self and being your most authentic self, because it's kind of like going back to that thing where like the best revenge is just kind of like success or just like being happy. And if you can be like a role model for spiritual metaphysical integration, other people are going to pay attention, right? Like there was so much success with The Secret and manifestation that like it got people who were non-believers paying attention. Like, oh my God, I can manifest something and, it can actually come true. So like having kind of better, more important, and more prominent success stories are going to be really helpful. Even if it's like, I had this amazing psychic reading or whatever. So it's going to be really challenging to convince people that spirituality and metaphysics is real if you're suffering with the concept. So if, you just like had your spiritual awakening and like you're going through a lot of shit and like, respect, love it, but like probably not the time to be trying to convince other people that like this is like the most perfect way to go. Like you need to kind of live that example. You need to be confident. You need to have like a very strong point of view and belief in yourself. And like, it's not always easy, and you can get like very intimidated and very kind of shut off and wanting to quit. But like, I feel like if you are willing to like go to bat for your beliefs, like you've got something there. You have something important to say. And hopefully what that thing is hopefully that thing is positive and promotes love, peace, and healing versus like negativity, hate, and shame. But whatever. I feel like even that there's a place for it in the universe, because we need to kind of like perpetually transmute this old negative stagnant energy. So I find this is going to be a soundbite that's taken way too far, but I genuinely find that hateful rhetoric ironically does have a place, because it puts forward this information to be transmuted, to be criticized, to be worked through, to have to generally just spread awareness. Like I feel like it actually ironically is like more important than not, right? Because if all of us were so politically correct and pretending like everything was perfectly fine, it would probably unintentionally repress a lot of shame and negativity, but it would also not educate and inform the collective what's going on, what's out there, what is by our collective standards right and wrong. So like, yes, there like ironically kind of like is a place for it. And I think the more that we kind of evolve and talk about these issues, hopefully the better it gets. And it's a long and non-perfect journey, but at least that's how I'm kind of like personally observing it. The biggest issue that I want to get into is why people are skeptics from like a slightly different perspective. So it's not a surprise that if you are someone who's living in negativity or living in fear, you've just harnessed a perception value that is like immovable. Like you are going to defend it to death because you are energetically, mentally, emotionally, whatever, even physically, extremely fragile. So, a lot of people who are uncertain of the future, whether that's tomorrow or that's, what happens after they die, they are going to be really, really afraid to let go of any perception values that they have, preconceived notions, anything that they've built up essentially as like a metaphorical suit of armor to intellectually protect them from anything that's unknown. So people who are in a really, really vulnerable place, and I don't just mean vulnerable, like just vulnerable in this context, like being vulnerable doesn't mean that you like fall into this category, if that makes sense. But yeah, people who are very vulnerable are not going to be willing to give up their beliefs. So if someone presents you a different perception value that like just questions and like directly attacks your personal identity, how you see the world, again, your perception value, what happens to you after you die, like anything and everything that has formed your physical reality, like I feel like people kind of don't talk about this a lot. It's not going to go over well, especially if you're like very aggressive about it. So, I'm just like, yeah, this like isn't a surprise. And while it's like very much a process and there's no like right way to do it or like straight answer, it's really about mitigating these fears and helping to, bring people to a level of conscious awareness, alignment of intuition, just general confidence in general, and just like helping them throughout all areas and aspects of their life. And the good thing is that I feel like, psychic ability and new age spirituality lot of asterisks on this, are generally willing and wanting to bring people into these places versus a cult or religion which is very into repression, shame, guilt, avoidance of sin. I feel like that's kind of like not making people feel very positive and confident, or like allowing them to kind of grow and evolve on their own terms in general. If someone has a very strong perception value that like anything and everything that they do in this lifetime doesn't matter because it only affects them, and there's not going to be anything that happens to them after they die, and they suddenly found out that it will, you would like erupt they might just cease to exist. Like they would just implode essentially, because what that essentially means is that particular person is going to need to take responsibility not only for themselves in the current moment, but literally everything that they've done in the past. And if you're telling someone that you need to do that and you need to take control of your life, take responsibility for the ways in which you not only hurt others, but hurt yourself, it ain't gonna be a fun conversation. Like people can't do that. They're not willing to do that. I mean, some people are, but like, it's hard. I can barely I channel and I can barely change my routine day to day. Like someone's gonna come and tell me that like my life was a lie. Done. Last reason. To sum up, live your truth, live your life as happily and successfully as you can, integrating and embodying what you genuinely feel is true, what you want others to know, how you want others to feel, obviously still having them retain like autonomy over their own lives, but like kind of like what you are preaching. If you're someone who is in this space and in this world and you're kind of like intimidated or scared by skeptics, I think it'll give you like a lot of confidence and just really be reassured with what you're speaking about, right? Like if someone really questioned your ideals, like, is this information that you're just regurgitating, or is this something that like you truly believe like to your core? Because that is something that is going to be able to withstand like a lot of shit, right? And just have a lot of compassion. Everyone is on their own journey. There's just some people who are in this lifetime who are just not meant to be believers, and that's like totally fine. It is what it is. And like understand that there's an important point and place for them. And I think that they have a lot of great aspects and attributes and special skills that can be leveraged for the good of anyone and everyone, right? So like, I think, dismissing them is sort of immature in a way, because you're just kind of like, they have nothing to offer the collective. And it's like, that's totally ridiculous. They're still part of source energy. They're still part of the collective. Like, it's kind of like your job to investigate like what that is, or help them if they're really struggling and they, that's the reason why they can't kind of like open themselves up, and, be responsible for, starting that conversation if they want it, obviously, right? Like we're never going to force healing on anybody. That's bad karma. But say, hey, if you want to try this, or if you want to do this, or just something I've noticed, like, let me know if you need help, be there for you, whatever. And I feel like that is the best, most appropriate and mature way to deal with skeptics, non-believers, and pessimists. And then, you just have to kind of like let things slide off of your back sometimes. Like, just gotta be the bigger person, I guess. I'm never the bigger person. Okay, bye.